was a quiet night in the small town of Hollow Creek, the kind of night where the silence presses down on you and the darkness feels heavier than usual. That's when Ellie decided to take the shortcut through the woods. She'd walked this path hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the trees loomed over her like silent sentinels, their twisted branches creaking in the wind. Ellie tried to shake off the unease creeping up her spine, but something about the air was wrong. There was a chill in the breeze, though it wasn't cold enough for it to make sense. Her footsteps echoed unnervingly through the trees as she walked faster, eager to get home. As she approached the clearing, she noticed something strange. A figure stood in the distance. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the shadows, but then it moved. Slowly, stiffly. Ellie's heart skipped a beat, and she stopped dead in her tracks. The figure didn't seem to be walking. It was more like it was dragging itself toward her, limbs jerking at odd angles. Her breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot so loud in the stillness of the forest. She turned to run, but froze when she heard a voice, faint but unmistakable. Ellie. It was her name. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew no one else was out here. No one. The voice didn't sound like it came from a person. It was distant, distorted, like a whisper carried by the wind. She turned around, terrified, and saw the figure again. Closer now. Too close. Ellie's eyes widened as she realized it was a woman, but not just any woman. Her face was pale, too pale. Her eyes were wide and empty, and her mouth hung open as if she were trying to speak, but couldn't. The woman's skin looked stretched, almost unnatural, and her clothes were torn, ragged at the edges. Ellie's breath quickened and her hands trembled as she backed away. Ellie, the voice whispered again, but this time it sounded as if it were right next to her ear. Her blood ran cold. She spun around, expecting to see the figure behind her, but there was nothing. Only the trees, the darkness. She kept walking, faster now, her footsteps quick and frantic as the night seemed to close in around her. The only sound was the rustling of the wind through the leaves, but even that seemed wrong, like it was whispering something just beyond her hearing. Ellie didn't dare look back. She kept her eyes forward, telling herself it was just her imagination. But the feeling in her gut, the one that had been growing since she first saw that figure, told her otherwise. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. A jolt of panic shot through her. She spun around, but again, nothing. Just the trees, the endless night, the hollow silence. But then she saw something in the distance. It was a faint glow, a flickering light like a candle. Ellie felt a strange pull toward it. Something about that light felt wrong. But she couldn't stop herself. Her feet moved on their own, bringing her closer and closer to the unnatural glow. As she approached, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to rise from the ground, wrapping around her legs, making it harder to move. And then she saw it, a small, weathered cabin that she had never noticed before, standing alone in the middle of the clearing. The light came from inside. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the door. The wood was splintered, the metal doorknob cold and rusted. She hesitated for a moment, her mind screaming at her to leave, to turn and run, but the door creaked open by itself, as if inviting her in. The moment she stepped inside, the air turned suffocatingly stale. The room was dim, the only light coming from a single candle flickering on a dusty table. And on the table there was something that made Ellie's blood run cold. A photograph. She picked it up, trembling, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw the image. It was a picture of her exact face, but the eyes in the photo were hollow, dark voids. And behind her, just faintly, a shadow stood. A figure, its face obscured, its hand resting on her shoulder. Ellie's knees buckled and she stumbled back, the photograph slipping from her grasp. A cold laugh echoed in the cabin, a soft, haunting sound that made her skin crawl. It was the same voice from before, the voice that had called her name. Ellie. It whispered again, but this time it was no longer distant. It was right behind her. With a sudden surge of terror, Ellie spun around. There, in the dim candlelight, stood the woman. Her face twisted in an unnatural smile, her eyes wide and empty, her hands outstretched as if she were going to reach for Ellie. Before Ellie could react, the woman lunged at her, but just as suddenly as she appeared, the figure vanished, leaving Ellie standing in the cabin alone, the only sound the flickering candle. And then, in the silence, Ellie realized the worst part. She wasn't alone. The figure wasn't gone. It was standing behind her, waiting. Ellie's breath hitched as she stood frozen in the center of the cabin. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the room, and for a moment, the silence felt as though it were pressing in from all sides. Her heart hammered in her chest, the thudding echoing loudly in her ears. The air had turned impossibly cold, the fog still creeping around the cabin's floor, making every movement feel like it took an eternity. She didn't dare turn around. She couldn't. Her body felt like it was made of stone, paralyzed by fear. But then she heard it, a faint rustling behind her like the sound of fabric dragging across the floor. The woman was there. She could feel it as if the very air had shifted with the presence of something, or someone, watching her. Slowly, Ellie reached out to grab the door handle, her fingers numb as they brushed against the cold metal. The moment her hand made contact, the door slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang, making her jump in shock. The sound reverberated in the small room, and she spun around in panic, her eyes darting desperately for an escape. But there was no exit. The cabin felt smaller now, claustrophobic, as though the walls were closing in on her. A whisper echoed in the air, low and guttural, so quiet she wasn't sure she heard it at first. But then it came again, unmistakable. "Ellie, you can't leave." Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but her legs refused to move. Her mind screamed at her to do something, to run, to fight, to scream. But she was frozen, caught in the grip of terror. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, warping and flickering until they took the shape of the woman again. She was standing just a few feet away now, her face expressionless, her hollow eyes locked on Ellie. Her outstretched hands were trembling slightly, as if they too were eager to make contact. Ellie's stomach churned with a deep, gnawing dread. This wasn't just some hallucination. The woman wasn't a figment of her imagination or a trick of the light. She was real, or at least something far too real to be explained. The woman took a slow step forward, her movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette with strings pulled too tight. Ellie's eyes widened as she instinctively backed away, stumbling over a loose floorboard, her hands scrambling for support. "Please, leave me alone," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, her presence so overwhelming that Ellie could feel her skin crawling, her breath freezing in her chest. The woman's mouth opened wide, wider than seemed possible, a deep, rasping sound coming from her throat. And then Ellie realized the voice, the distorted whisper that had called her name, had been the woman's all along. The woman's lips began to move again, but the words that came out were no longer a whisper. They were clear, commanding, as though they were pulling at something deep inside Ellie. "Stay with me. Forever." A cold surge of panic flooded Ellie's veins. She turned and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron candlestick from the table, and swung it wildly toward the woman. The metal made contact with nothing but air. The woman's figure flickered for a split second, and then disappeared entirely, as though she were nothing but smoke in the candlelight. Ellie's breath came in desperate gasps as she stumbled backward, her body still trembling. But before she could fully process what had just happened, the candlelight flickered again, casting everything into brief darkness. When the light returned, Ellie's eyes widened in horror. The cabin wasn't the same anymore. The walls seemed to ripple and warp, as though they were dissolving into a vast, endless void. The floor beneath her feet felt like it was buckling, as if the very foundation of the cabin was crumbling away. And then, from the far corner of the room, she heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, scraping across the floor. They were too heavy, too deliberate to be her own. Ellie turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat, to see the woman again. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, just beyond her outstretched hands, were shadows. Dozens of them, dark, shifting shapes that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. They were all waiting for something, or someone. Ellie's heart skipped a beat as the woman stepped closer. The shadows seemed to flicker and move around her like a cloak, swirling with every movement. The woman's eyes, dark as voids, bore into Ellie's soul. "You shouldn't have come here, Ellie." The voice rasped from her lips, but it was no longer the distorted whisper. It was clearer, more commanding, as if the woman were speaking with many voices at once. Ellie's legs finally found their strength. She turned and ran, the weight of the air pushing down on her with every step. She couldn't think. She couldn't stop. The door, the exit, the light, anything to escape. But when she reached the door, she couldn't open it. The handle wouldn't budge, no matter how hard she twisted it. It was as if the cabin itself had become alive, keeping her trapped inside. The shadows were closing in, their forms growing larger, more distorted. Then the woman's voice came again, this time sounding softer, almost sad. "You can't escape, Ellie. You were always meant to stay." With every word, Ellie felt her strength waning. The cold around her deepened, and the room seemed to spin. The shadows were at her feet now, crawling up her legs, their touch icy and unnatural. "Stay with me," the woman whispered again. The darkness swelled around Ellie, and with a final scream, everything went black. Ellie's eyes snapped open, but she wasn't sure where she was. The familiar weight of the cold fog pressing around her was gone. The air was stale, and the light was dim, much dimmer than the candlelit room she had last seen. She was lying on the floor, surrounded by an unsettling silence. The walls, though still standing, seemed warped and broken, as if they had been battered by something far worse than time. Her hands were cold, trembling as they rested on the wooden planks beneath her. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, and she sat up with effort, blinking against the heavy darkness. She could hear nothing now. No whispers, no scraping footsteps, no voices that called her name. For a moment, she thought she had somehow escaped. But the moment the thought crossed her mind, a figure stepped into view from the shadows. It was the woman. She stood there, her gaunt face illuminated by the faint, flickering light of a single candle. Her hollow eyes locked onto Ellie with an intense gaze. Ellie's heart raced, the terror threatening to paralyze her once again. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but her body felt heavy, slow, as though it was no longer her own. "You thought you could leave?" The woman's voice echoed through the silence. It was softer now, almost compassionate, but there was a terrible underlying cruelty in it. "You thought you could escape?" Ellie tried to rise, but her legs refused to carry her. The weight of the woman's gaze pinned her down. "Why?" Ellie gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this to me?" The woman stepped closer, her face inches from Ellie's. Her cold breath brushed against Ellie's skin, sending a shiver down her spine. "You were always meant to stay," she said softly. "This place, it takes what is lost, what is forgotten, and keeps it. Forever." Ellie's chest tightened with panic, the truth starting to dawn on her. The stories she had heard, the warnings about the cabin. It wasn't just haunted. It was a prison, and she was the latest soul it had claimed. "No," Ellie whispered, her voice breaking. "No, please, I can't stay here." The woman reached out, her hand cold as ice, and touched Ellie's cheek. The contact was like being submerged in ice water. Every inch of Ellie's skin burned with a cold that went deeper than bone. "You already have," the woman replied, her voice now chillingly calm. "It's too late to turn back." A deep, sorrowful wail echoed in the distance, faint but unmistakable. The shadows seemed to move with purpose, twisting and crawling closer to them, as though drawn to the sound. Ellie's heart pounded as she looked around, searching for any way out, any escape. The door was still sealed tight. The walls still seemed to bend and ripple with unnatural force. The cabin, it seemed, was alive, and it wasn't letting her go. I don't belong here," Ellie choked out, tears filling her eyes as she reached out toward the woman. "Please, let me go. I just want to leave." The woman stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before shaking her head slowly. "You're already a part of this place now. The shadows will always find you. There is no leaving. There is no escape." Ellie's vision blurred as the cold seeped deeper into her skin, freezing her limbs. The air around her grew thick, suffocating. Her breaths came in shallow, panicked gasps as the shadows began to crawl up her legs again, wrapping around her like chains. And then, as though in a dream, she felt herself sinking. Her body felt heavier with each passing second, the darkness pulling at her, swallowing her whole. Before she could understand what was happening, the last thing she saw was the woman's face, a faint, twisted smile curling at the corners of her lips as the shadows fully consumed her. Ellie's scream was swallowed by the darkness, and the cabin fell silent once again. The woman stood alone in the now quiet room, her eyes scanning the empty space. She turned away and walked slowly into the shadows. Somewhere, deep within the cabin, Ellie's whispers echoed faintly, just as lost as all the others who had come before her. The cabin waited, and it would wait again until another soul wandered too close and became another part of its eternal, unyielding hunger.